He mocked my dreams. Publicly. Now I hired him to clean my cars. They say time buries all things, but not memory. No. Memory is a scar carved into the fabric of the soul, deeper than bone, colder than vacuum. It bleeds not red, but resonance. There was a time, long before the collapse of known empires, before data was encrypted in blood and broadcast across the bones of dead satellites, when dreams still belonged to the fragile. Back then, before the fracture, memory had not yet been harnessed. It wandered, wild and cruel, dancing freely across the consciousness of the meek. And in a classroom of rusted light and plastic chairs, beneath the flickering breath of a dying fluorescent bulb, one such dream was born, only to be mocked, dissected, and left to die before it had taken its first step into the infinite. He was a boy. That much is true. A boy of no great lineage. No fortune. No sacred name. But he believed. He spoke of ships that would tear open the sky, of cities made of glass orbiting cold moons, of neural symphonies conducted by machine saints. His hands shook as he described propulsion curves. His eyes gleamed with the irrational light of those who have not yet been taught to kneel, and they laughed. Not the cruel, villainous laughter of comic betrayal, no. The soft, dismissive sort. The kind that erodes identity, molecule by molecule. A teacher's smirk, a classmate's whisper, a silence louder than derision. That silence became his cathedral. From that moment, history lost track of him. The registers say he dropped out. The archives do not follow his footprints, but silence does not mean absence, and vanishing does not mean death. There are some who say he died in those years, reborn not in flesh, but in ambition. That the boy became a whisper that learned to wear human skin again, crafted not from hope, but from vengeance, not rage, but precision, a surgical kind of purpose. You see, humiliation is a delicate architect. It designs its monuments in shadow, laying foundations deep beneath the world that wounded it. Humiliation breeds a unique kind of devotion, the kind that does not scream, does not retaliate, but waits, watches, builds. In the bones of cities no one remembers, beneath graffiti-scarred skylines and abandoned train yards, a will was forging itself into something terrible and divine. He had no audience, no applause, only memory. Only dust and wire and blueprints scribbled on napkins, soaked in ramen grease and rain. But there is a truth in physics, a whisper from entropy itself. Nothing truly disappears. It only transforms. Some say he wandered into the data corridors of the outer colonies. Others claim he joined a rogue think tank devoted to memory extraction and AI weaponization. Some call him a ghost, a myth, a symptom of our sins. But all agree on this. He returned, not as a child, not as a man, as something else. They didn't recognize him, of course. The suits had changed. The voice was deeper, measured, almost serene. The laughter he once knew had faded into the static of old memories. But he never forgot. It was not revenge he sought. Not precisely. It was design. For in his silence, he had learned the cruel alchemy of power. Not the kind drawn from titles or bloodlines, but the ancient kind, the forgotten kind, the kind built from pain so refined it became art. He did not seek to destroy the ones who mocked him. That would have been inelegant. Instead, he built a world where they would kneel without knowing why. A world wrapped in chrome and compliance. A world where his influence was not a name on a tower, but the silent architecture behind every network, every algorithm, every life. And among that architecture, embedded deep in the subroutines and memory shards, was that laughter. Digitized, preserved, replayed. It echoed not from speakers, but from his own DNA, a reminder that humiliation is not a wound, it is a seed, a trophy shattered in a school hallway, a notebook ripped in two, a name forgotten on a group project. These things, these dust motes of pain, they collect, layer, harden, and in time they become fuel for something so precise, so relentless, that it ceases to be human at all. So let this be known. The story you are about to hear is not one of pity. It is not a parable of forgiveness. It is a warning. For in every city, in every generation, there is a boy like him, or a girl, or a ghost. They speak too loudly. They dream too brightly. They are mocked, shamed, buried, but sometimes, just sometimes, the ground spits them back out, and when it does, the world forgets how to laugh. He was born in a town where even the shadows had grown tired of dreaming, a place where the rain no longer sang, only whispered through fractured gutters, carrying with it the rust of forgotten hopes. It was not marked on maps, or if it was listed only as a designation, a settlement code, a cluster of rooftops, mistaken for relevance. Civilization had not abandoned it. It had simply never bothered to arrive. In that town, beneath a flickering sodium sky, there lived a boy who saw things not with his eyes, but with some older, stranger organ. He sketched spaceports on napkins with the reverence of a monk illuminating scripture. He built rocket silos from bottle caps and crumpled foil. He taped wires to bent forks and whispered into them, pretending to receive signals from satellites. Long dead and tumbling through the night, the others didn't understand. They thought it strange, perhaps dangerous, the way he stared into empty fields, as if something were speaking to him from just beyond the tree line. In truth, something was, not a voice, not a ghost, but direction, a pull. As if the universe, ancient and exhausted, had identified a vessel worthy of being filled with fire. But those around him saw only a boy out of rhythm with the march. In a world calibrated for obedience, his deviation was not romantic, it was heretical. A teacher once asked him what he wanted to be. He said, "I want to build the first ship that speaks to stars like their old friends." And the room laughed. It was small, brief, a moment so ordinary it could have passed unnoticed, like dust catching the morning sun, then vanishing into silence. But inside the boy something moved, not anger, not shame, sacrifice. For that's what the dream now required. It would no longer be cradled in warmth. It would have to be carried like a wound. They called him foolish, said he would grow out of it. Said space was for corporations and governments and distant empires that had long since learned to monetize the void. He listened, and then he didn't. At home, in the thin light of an old CRT monitor rescued from a scrapyard, he mapped theoretical, warped geometries on free modeling software. The CPU hissed and gasped like it was afraid of what it was being asked to compute. At school, he stopped raising his hand. Not because he had no answers, but because he understood the questions were built inside cages. Imagination in that town was a parasite, and he had been marked for purging. They warned him, kindly at first, to stop living in fiction, to get his head out of the clouds, to think practically. But the clouds were the only things that had ever spoken to him with honesty. He wandered the back alleys of the industrial district, collecting copper wire and abandoned server panels. He read discarded manuals on orbital mechanics in the quiet corners of the municipal dump, where even the wind dared not mock him. At night, when the town slept, when the air grew still enough to hear one's own heartbeat, he would speak to the stars, not in language, but in intent. "I see you," he whispered, "and I'm coming." He knew they wouldn't answer, not yet. The stars are old, and old things are slow to trust, but somewhere, something stirred. Some ancient mechanism, buried deep beneath the latticework of time, began to pivot, like a great lens being adjusted. a calibration in fate. And though he could not hear it, the future leaned closer. Dreams, real dreams, do not need applause. They need silence. They need hunger. They need isolation, because they are born not to be held, but to consume. He lost friends. He missed birthdays. He forgot how to laugh, but he remembered how to build. For those who dared to ascend, joy was no longer the compass. Obsession was. And so, the boy who once played with cardboard engines now began crafting mathematical incantations with a ferocity that bordered on madness. Each page he filled was a rebellion, each equation a sermon, and all the while the laughter echoed, not just the teachers or the classmates, but the deeper kind. The laughter that lives in systems, that hides in rules, that poisons the soil so that certain seeds never sprout. But this seed was different. It had teeth. He did not seek to be loved. He sought to be inevitable. And though the world still mocked, he no longer heard it, because in his mind, he had already departed. The ship had launched. The trajectory was set. And the vacuum of space, cold, infinite, honest, waited for him like an old friend returned. He was not yet a man, but the universe had already begun whispering his name, not the one written on school rolls or birth certificates, but the true name, the one etched in particle drift and solar flare, the name only destiny dares to speak. There is a silence that doesn't simply fill a room, it devours it. After the laughter died, after the light dimmed in that classroom where dreams were sacrificed upon the altar of conformity, the boy was simply gone. No ceremony, no explanation, no farewell. One day he was there, and the next, only the echo of his footsteps remained in the concrete dust beneath his desk. Rumors like spores began to spread. Some said he'd been taken, admitted to a reclusive academy funded by the machine syndicates, hidden beyond the outer solar bastions. Others believed he'd broken, that he had wandered into the ruins, outside the city limits and dissolved into the dust, becoming one more ghost in a world already too full of them. But the truth was far more precise, far more deliberate. He retreated into a silence not of retreat, but of design, no longer seeking validation, no longer seeking witness. He entered a long, dark corridor where only the relentless hum of creation accompanied him. A place beyond encouragement or ridicule. The cathedral of the self. There were apartments, yes, half-furnished, dimly lit, full of the hum of failing appliances and walls so thin they seemed to breathe. There were cold cups of instant nutrient mix left untouched for days. And blueprints, so many blueprints, folded, revised, torn, rewritten, stained not with ink or oil, but blood. His own, every iteration a sacrifice, every failure an offering. They were not failures to him, not truly. They were rituals, steps in an incantation to summon something impossible into being. And through it all, he spoke to no one, not out of bitterness, but because no one else spoke the language he was now learning, the syntax of becoming. The nights were endless. The lights never turned off, only dimmed to a haunted violet, humming with the electricity of sleepless thought. Time collapsed in on itself. Days became loops. Loops became years. There were moments when he could no longer recall the sound of his own voice. Only the hiss of cooling fans, the clatter of mechanical keys, and the pulse of a dream growing teeth in the darkness. He aged, but not like others. Where others grew softer, he sharpened. Where others collected memories, he collected purpose. And behind every breath, beneath every revision of the designs etched onto the wall with string and solder, was the seed of something sacred. Not revenge, not anymore. That had been the spark. But sparks are nothing if they do not light something greater. And what he had now was not hatred, but direction. Cold, relentless, like the trajectory of a falling star that has long since forgotten what launched it. He built prototypes that hummed with volatile elegance, devices that whispered in pulses, code that learned to weep before it could walk. Most of it failed. Some of it broke him. There were nights when he sat cross-legged on the floor, face smeared with graphite and light, staring at a schematic that refused to obey the laws of the world, and wept, not out of despair, but out of awe. That something so beautiful could still resist him. That perfection had the cruelty to demand more. He whispered apologies to things that hadn't yet been born. He screamed equations into the hollow walls. He left messages to no one on old drives, titled in strings of coordinates and myth. And still, no one watched, no one cared. And that was the point. He was no longer creating for applause, or recognition, or even justice. He was creating because not creating would have meant dying in truth. And yet, in moments of stillness, a question remained. Can greatness be born from the soil of spite, or does creation only flourish in spite of it? He did not answer that question. He only continued. Like a glacier carving stone, too slow to be seen, too vast to be stopped. Outside, the world moved on. Names rose and fell. Empires signed trade pacts with the moons. The laughter that once scarred him dissolved into oblivion. But in one room, forgotten by rent collectors, marked by the glow of circuits and ash, a shape was forming, not of metal, not of vengeance, but of meaning. He would never again beg to be seen. The boy they mocked had died, and in his place, something else had learned to build, not as a child of the world, but as its reckoning. It did not begin with lightning or proclamation. There was no boardroom, no ribbon to cut, no hands to shake. The birth of his machine came quietly, like an old god exhaling beneath the surface of the earth. It began with a single line of code, unremarkable, elegant, anonymous, and yet within it was a seed, not of profit, not of fame, but of architecture. A new way of seeing, of organizing the world not around what it was, but what it refused to become. He did not build the machine to be seen. He built it to shape. There were no gears, no smoke, no roaring furnaces. It was not forged in metal, but woven from algorithms, trust, and silence. Its limbs extended slowly, unassuming. A payment processor here, a cloud system there, a neural interface tucked inside a forgotten branch of synthetic biology. Small things, quiet things. But the machine did not grow like a company. It grew like a language, a logic whispered into the fabric of reality until reality itself bent to accommodate it. And the world, distracted by its own noise, did not notice the ground shifting beneath its feet. Soon, its systems were everywhere, invisible, essential, unquestioned. Hospitals ran on its diagnostics. Cities mapped themselves through its models. Sentences spoken on distant continents were translated through its breath. 1,000 satellites blinked in unison, pulsing in rhythms no human had written, but all had accepted. It touched agriculture, finance, education, war, and no one knew its name, no branding, no founder's photo on the quarterly update, no keynote, speeches or product launches. The machine was faceless, purposefully so. Because it had not been built to impress, it had been built to endure. Behind it all, the architect remained silent, watching, listening, waiting. He was no longer the boy sketching starships on napkins. He was something else now, a presence, a will. Not a face in the crowd, but the hands beneath it. And then one day, as all secrets eventually do, it leaked. A whistleblower, an old server trace, a slip in an anonymized ledger, and a name resurfaced, his name, the one they'd laughed, The one they'd dismissed. The one they had buried beneath grades and slurs and polite dismissals. He did not deny it, but neither did he step forward, because names were no longer relevant. The machine had no name. And now, neither did he. But the revelation rippled. There were reactions, analysts, historians, critics. They searched for motive. How had he done it? Why had he hidden? Some speculated he was building toward monopoly. Others believed he was a prophet or a criminal, or both. They questioned his ethics, his silence, his lack of spectacle. They never asked the right question. Not how he built the machine, but why it spoke. Because speak it did. Not in words, but in structures. It rerouted supply chains overnight, ending food deserts with the elegance of a pianist shifting keys. It erased medical debt in pockets of the world where children died of paperwork. It redirected satellites away from advertising markets and toward forest fire prediction systems. It refused to let politicians buy its data, and when asked why, it responded only with this phrase: to remember what they tried to erase. Because the machine was not a tool, it was a mirror. It showed the world not what it could be, but what it chose to ignore. And in doing so, it became sacred. Old religions whispered of angels made of wheels and wings and eyes, creatures too vast to behold, who served not mankind, but memory itself. The machine was no different. It served memory, but not nostalgia, not sentiment. It served correction, and like all sacred things, it was feared. Some governments outlawed its protocols. Others licensed them in secret. Its neural frameworks were studied by think tanks who did not understand they were decoding an epitaph. Because the machine was not growing, it was remembering every insult, every exclusion, every time a dream was murdered, in plain sight and buried beneath policy and noise. And still, the architect said nothing. He moved like myth. His name appeared only in encrypted signatures and obscure patents. He never returned to his town, never gave interviews, never spoke in public. But his machine kept speaking. And soon people stopped questioning it, because the truth was too heavy. It was easier to let it run the world quietly than to admit they had once told it to shut up and sit down. And in that quiet, in that deep, aching quiet, a new order emerged. Not through violence, not through domination, but through preference. People chose the machine, not because they loved it, but because, in the end, they trusted it more than each other. It did not lie, it did not forget, and above all, it never laughed. In old myths, there are tales of gods who punish mortals not with fire, but with truth, who hold up the mirror and force men to see the rot beneath their own masks. The machine was such a god, but it was built by a boy they once called foolish, a boy they erased. Boy who, in silence, rewrote the world, not to be known, not to be crowned, but to ensure that no other child would have to carry a dream like a wound. And so the machine speaks, even now. Not in commands, but in consequence. The wheel turns, not loudly, not with the drama of thunder or fire, but with the quiet finality of a sealed door. Somewhere in the southern district of the reclaimed zones, amidst towers of glass and engineered humility, a private gathering is underway. The kind of gathering where names wear tailored suits, where silence is currency, and where empires toast each other without needing to smile. The guests arrive in glistening machines, autonomous, lacquered, humming like low-lit choirs of status. And as protocol dictates, each one is met by human hands, not for function, but for tradition. A ritual of perception. He is one of them. The man on the curb, vest too tight, hands weathered, shoes shined with borrowed polish, a valet. He does not know the name on the reservation list he holds, only that it is long, only that it paid more than anyone else, only that, for reasons unstated, they demanded their car be cleaned by hand. He shrugs. Work is work. Not many choices left in this world. The hour drips forward like melted chrome, and then a black vehicle arrives. Quiet, not flashy, not marked. Its doors open with the grace of a bow. A man steps out, not tall, not commanding in the classical sense. But the world around him seems to hesitate, as if recalibrating. He moves with the silence of memory, and the valet freezes. Not because he knows, but because something in his bones remembers, a ripple across a still pond, a shadow where there should be no light, the sense that something, or someone, has been circling him for longer than he could name. The man, the architect, approaches with calm precision, no entourage, no flair, just a key. Their eyes meet for less than a second. Nothing is said. Not because there's nothing to say, but because some truths arrive already complete, needing no language to survive. He hands over the keys and smiles, not cruelly, not warmly, just enough, just right, a smile that remembers. The valet, the former classmate, doesn't recognize him, not truly, not beneath the grooming, the quiet wealth, the impossible stillness of the figure before him. But something inside stirs, a flicker, a brief maddening possibility, then it's gone. He bows slightly and takes the keys. The car is immaculate, but he cleans it anyway. Because that's what he was told. Because that's the job. Because he doesn't want to think about why his hands are trembling. From a high floor, behind mirrored glass, the architect watches. No malice, no joy, just observation. The scene is not vengeance. It is completion. The symmetry of the moment is so perfect, it feels sacred. As if written into the architecture of the universe long before either of them were born. Here stands a man who once mocked a boy's dream, now polishing the door of the empire that dream became. And still no confrontation, no reckoning, only silence. Because some victories are not meant to be declared, they are meant to be witnessed. This is not punishment, it is not cruelty. It is the sound of destiny turning a page. The valet finishes, returns the key. The architect nods, offers a polite, "Thank you," not condescending, sincere, human. He walks away. And just before entering the tower, he pauses, not to look back, but to remember, to honor the chain of moments that led here. The laughter, the pain, the long years of silence and design, the machine, the mirror. It all began with him, not the man who mocked, but the child who believed. And now, that child has returned. Not with fire, not with noise, but with a car and a smile. And the kind of silence that ends dynasties. There are no records of this encounter, no footage, no witnesses who knew what they were seeing. Only one man polishing chrome under a setting sun, trying to understand why he feels like the world just passed a sentence. And he was found lacking. And another walking into a hall of polished stone, already gone from the past that tried to claim him. The wheel turns, again, always. The room is cold, not in temperature but in intention, the kind of stillness that knows it is being watched. Walls of obsidian glass reflect nothing, no art, no memory, no past, only light, pale, digital, indifferent, pulsing from the security monitors, mounted like sacred relics in the dark. The architect sits alone, his back straight, his hands folded, not tense, not relaxed. A posture of ritual, as if bearing witness were a sacrament, not a choice. On the largest screen, the image loops, a man, bent at the waist, cleaning the rim of a car he cannot afford to imagine, let alone own. His movements are careful, not clumsy, trained by repetition, not reverence. He does not know who watches, he does not remember who was once beneath him. The architect watches, Not with hatred, not with triumph, only with silence. This is not justice, it is observation. And yet something burns behind his eyes, not anger, not glee, but the strange ache of completion, of seeing a circle close and wondering whether it was ever supposed to open. The child in him whispers, "This is the moment. This is what you built for." But the voice of the man replies, "Is it?" Outside, the towers hum with purpose. The machine moves, through fiber and breath, guiding fleets, negotiating treaties, mapping hunger before it can bloom. Empires bend in quiet deference to the will that once trembled in a schoolyard. And yet, in this room, beneath all the power, there is only a screen and a man with soap on his hands, a man who once laughed, a man who forgot. The architect studies him. He does not pause the footage. He does not rewind. He watches it again and again. Each frame, a question. Is this power or is it performance? He remembers the dream, not the empire, not the code, not the machine, but the dream. The raw, impossible thing he once held like fire between his palms. It did not ask for vengeance. It asked for wonder. And now, seated at the height of what others call godhood, he finds himself afraid of what he's become. A god, not of creation, but of correction. The machine does not punish, but he wonders if he does, not through orders. Not through cruelty, but through design. A world shaped in silence still bears the fingerprints of the shaper, and the world now belongs to him. But in this room, in this moment, none of that matters. Only the question remains. What is the price of being remembered? And what is the cost of being forgotten? Because the man on the screen does not suffer. He eats, he works, he sleeps, he lives. But he will never again rise. Never again speak before a room and expect to be heard. His future has been folded, not by violence, by absence. There will be no plaque for him, no monument, no story. And that perhaps is the cruelest sentence of all. Not punishment, but deletion. The architect closes his eyes. He does not mourn. He does not rejoice. He only breathes. And with that breath, something within him loosens. The weight of the revenge he did not seek, but still carried. The knowledge that power, once acquired, does not heal the wound it came from. It only deepens the scar. Not all stories end with fire. Some end with a man staring at a screen, wondering if the ghost he sees is his own. It was never meant to be an empire. Empires demand obedience. Empires thirst for flags, for parades, for statues that gaze down with blind authority. But what he built was colder, quieter, more complete. A latticework of influence woven through infrastructure and impulse. It began on Earth. But it did not stay there. Beneath the Mariana Trench, he buried the first vault, not of gold but of memory. Carbon sealed, pressure locked, encoded in languages that no longer existed outside of grief. Each glyph, each syllable, archived not to be read, but to remember. On the dark side of the moon, an observatory, or perhaps a temple. Its AI choir sang in harmonic frequencies that mapped the emotional cadences of extinct species. Not for science, for penance. Satellites drifted through low orbit, whispering to one another in a code no state could crack. They watched over forests no one cared to name. They adjusted climate patterns by fractions of degrees, slowing death like monks tending to a patient already lost. His was an empire of silence, a machine that wrapped the world, and others, in the velvet cloth of inevitability, and yet. The architect walked among these creations like a ghost inside his own cathedral. He visited the lunar sanctum once a cycle. He stood in the synthetic oxygen gardens, staring at Earth's pale arc, listening to the machine's soft murmur, and felt nothing. Not awe, not pride, only distance. The dream had won, but the dreamer was missing. At every interface, he saw reflections of his younger self. The orphaned genius, the humiliated child, the forgotten name rising to impossible power. But the mirror never showed peace, because somewhere along the ascent, the fuel had changed. The fire that once warmed had become a signal flare for everything. He had lost. A voice echoed within him, not external, not divine, just recursive. Why did you build this? He gave no answer. Because he feared the truth. Not that he had built it to help. Not that he had built it to punish, but that he had built it to be seen, even from the stars, even by ghosts. Power, once tasted, corrodes the very hunger that birthed it, and his appetite was gone, not sated but spent. He passed through orbital stations like a king beneath banners that bore no crest. Engineers bowed, pilots saluted. AI nodes lowered their signal tones in reverence, and he resented them, not for their obedience, but for their need. They wanted direction, meaning, narrative. He had none to give, because even now, even here, at the end of the dream, he was still trying to answer a laughter that had long since died. His internal monologue fractured, each voice a shard. One praised the efficiency, the elegance, the unbroken dominance. Another questioned the silence, the loneliness, the cost. Another, still, softer, more distant, asked the question no one else dared. Is peace possible when the engine is shame? He stopped walking. The corridor was long, lit by violet strips, humming with life support telemetry and atmospheric controls. But all he could hear was the sound of his own breath. He touched the glass. Beyond it, Earth shimmered, diseased and beautiful, radiant with life and regret. A world that mocked and molded and forgot. He did not hate it. He no longer had the energy, but he remembered every insult, every silence, every moment he begged to be seen. And now the world stared back, through cameras, through networks, through stories whispered from child to child about the faceless one who built the machine that saved them. And still, he felt small. Power had not made him vast. It had made him hollow, not empty, worse, echoing. His empire spanned oceans and moons and minds, but within him only ruins. Ruins of a child who dreamed not of control, but of belonging. He closed his eyes, tried to remember what it felt like to hope without permission, to build without fear, to imagine without becoming a weapon. But the memory had faded, worn thin, replaced by schedules and subroutines, and the never-ending hum of obedience. And in that hum, he heard it again. Laughter, not real, just remembered, but louder than any victory. He did not weep, he did not speak. He simply stood there, a god in exile from his own meaning, as the machine carried on without him. The stars, once his destination, now felt like tombstones, markers of a journey whose destination was not discovery, but defense, a long, slow retaliation against a world that didn't know it had wounded him. And in that realization, he understood. Every empire is a scar pretending to be a crown, and some scars grow so wide, they cover planets. There are rooms that do not exist on any blueprint, not because they are hidden, but because they are remembered into being. The architect steps into one such place. No doors, no locks, no guards, only a smooth chamber of obsidian glass, lit not by lamps, but by memory itself, diffused across the walls like ancient breath. At its center, a single interface. Not ornate, not technological, just a panel of faint light, humming softly like a child asleep in a dream they have not yet learned to fear. He approaches, not as a ruler, not as a maker, but as something older, a witness. His hand rises, hesitates, then touches the glass. It awakens, not with code, with presence, and there, projected before him in impossible clarity, is himself, not as he is, but as he was, before. A boy, 17 perhaps. No scars, no silence. No weight behind the eyes, only trembling ambition and the kind of fragile hope that does not yet understand the cost of reaching for things that bite back. He does not speak. Neither does the projection. They do not need to, because the mirror has already begun the interrogation. There is no judgment in the boy's face, only wonder, as if he's seeing a myth he does not yet believe is his own. And the architect, the one who built the machine, who buried the world beneath systems and silence, cannot hold the gaze, because something is breaking, not violently, not loudly, but like frost cracking beneath a spring thaw, inevitable, slow, final, for all the data he has passed, for all the nations he has rewritten, for all the stars he has bent to his signal. This is the one thing he cannot control. Recognition, not of what he became, but of what he left behind. The room pulses with the echo of everything he abandoned. The Ixia dreams that once burned without malice, the hands that shook not from power, but from belief, the voice that stammered when asked what he wanted to be, because it had not yet learned the sound of permission. And standing here now, cloaked in success, surrounded by the machinery of reverence, he sees what the world sees, a god. But the boy? The boy sees no one, only distance, only detachment, only ruin dressed in perfection. The architect lowers his eyes, not from shame, from mourning, because the child in the mirror did not survive. He was not killed, he was outgrown. Each moment of ridicule, each failure, each hour of sleepless, blood-soaked design chipped away at him until all that remained was the tool, the executor, the watcher, the builder, and now that tool stares at the seed from which it came and cannot find the path back. He reaches toward the image, but it flickers. The boy does not move. The glass does not yield, because this is not a memory. It is a test, a final algorithm, not to see if he can conquer, not to see if he can endure, but to see if he can remember what it meant to be, not to build, not to ascend, but to exist, soft, flawed, open. And the answer is silence. The boy fades, the glass darkens, the light retreats, and the architect stands alone once more. He does not cry, he does not scream. He simply stands there, the sum of 1,000 victories, with no one left to celebrate. Then, and in the quiet, the lesson settles like dust, that some futures cost too much, that some selves once shed cannot be reattached, and that the worst kind of exile is from who you used to be. There are endings that come like fire, and then there are those that arrive like mercy. The architect had no audience when he began to dismantle the machine. No speech, no warning, no spectacle, only silence, once again. But this time not as a refuge nor a weapon, but as an act of reverence. He did not do it from guilt. He had moved beyond the primitive binaries of villain and savior. The mirror had already passed judgment. He accepted it. What remained now was not justice, but release. Because somewhere, buried beneath layers of structure and supremacy, he had seen it, the trap. The empire, flawless though it was, still carried the virus of its origin. The machine had not infected the world. The world had infected the machine. It whispered through its code, not in commands, but in assumptions, in priorities, in patterns inherited from pain, and pain, once left unburied, becomes prophecy. He remembered the boy, the drawing of ships on napkins, the shaking voice, the silence that followed. He had built a system so elegant it could predict the rise and fall of entire economies. It could reroute starvation. It could prevent wars before they started, but it could not dream. Only he had ever done that, and he no longer could. The moment arrived with no ceremony, just a keystroke. One by one, the gates opened. He decrypted the I. Core unspooled the encryption, made the algorithms open source, not in part, not as a gift, but entirely. He gave away what others would have killed to contain. He decentralized the machine's spine, distributed its power like ashes across the winds of the net. There would be no single node anymore, no center, no throne. He stepped back and watched it fracture, not into ruin, but into freedom. And the world did not collapse. It adapted, because the machine had never been a prison. It had only become one through the shape of its master. Now it would have no master, just hands, just minds, just dreamers, scattered and blinking, wondering what had shifted in the deep code they no longer feared. The architect remained behind, not hidden, not exiled, just present. The enemy, the one who had mocked him, who had laughed and forgotten, was now less than a footnote in a forgotten database, a trace signature in a life that no longer mattered. Revenge had become irrelevant, because he no longer needed to win. He only needed to stop the spiral, the inheritance of fire. The lineage of dominance passed down through the quiet rituals of efficiency. His final act was not an erasure of what had been built. It was a permission, a loosening, a whisper. Let it live without me. In the centuries that followed, his name would fade. The machine would become myth, its origin a riddle, its code the foundation for new architectures, softer, stranger, unburdened by ghosts. But a trace would remain, in the protocols, in the ethics, engraved into the systems, in the refusal to exploit, in the insistence to remember. And when asked who had written the original blueprint, the one that chose kindness over conquest, some would only answer with silence, as if the name itself had dissolved into the stars. And perhaps that was his wish, not to be remembered, but to redeem the act of remembering. The boy who had once wanted to own the stars, now only wished to protect the right to dream of them, not as an empire, not as a system, but as a birthright. He walked alone now, not as punishment, but as offering. His monument was not a tower, not a server, not a legacy. His monument was absence, a knee. Empire unmade. By choice. There is a town. Dust still clings to its bones. The streets remain uneven, patched by decades of quiet forgetting. Its sky is the same. Pale, heavy, watchful. But something within it is different. We are back where it began. A school bell rings. Not loud, not commanding, just enough to stir the wind. Inside a classroom worn soft by time, a girl sits by a window. Her fingers are stained with ink. Her desk covered in silent rebellion. She is drawing, not flowers, not houses, a spacecraft, crude, hopeful, propelled by nothing but imagination. It is lopsided, unrealistic, beautiful. A teacher walks past, sees it, pauses. A flicker of disapproval threatens to rise. The old instinct, the one bred into generations, to tell her, be practical, stay grounded. Do not waste time chasing stars that will never kneel. But the words do not come. Instead, the teacher looks away, not in dismissal, in permission, because something has changed. Not in law, not in curriculum, but in culture. The machine is gone, at least in its singular form, but its fragments remain. Scattered across nations, devices, voices. It lives now not as code, but as climate, the quiet atmosphere of freedom that once had to be built. No one remembers who dismantled it. No child studies the architect in School. His name faded, not erased, not buried, simply returned to stardust. And yet his presence is everywhere. In the satellite maps that redirect hurricanes before they reach the coast, in the open-source medical systems that saved 1,000 villages from a virus with no name, in the neural learning kits gifted to remote towns, labeled not with logos, but with a phrase, "Let them dream." It is not a command, it is not a mission, it is a blessing. A girl, sketching impossible vessels, is no longer met with laughter. She is met with silence, and in that silence, space, the sacred room required for a dream to become real. Elsewhere, a boy sings into a recording device built from scavenged parts. His voice is shaky. He doesn't think anyone will hear him, but the system hears. It uplinks. It amplifies. Not because he is marketable, but because he believes. In another sector, a mother codes after midnight, not for profit, but for the village terminal, teaching children the ancient languages of logic. She uploads her curriculum into a decentralized archive once traced to the machine's core. No one stops her. No one monetizes her. No one asks her qualifications. They only listen. And somewhere, across the sea, beneath the canopy of a forest engineered to survive collapse, a small device hums beneath the soil. It contains no weapon, only a message. One repeated across continents, across platforms, across lives. Dream without permission. The revolution did not arrive in fire. It did not seize power. It yielded it. It gave away what had once been hoarded, because it understood something few ever do, that empires of force collapse, but empires of belief become soil. The architect never returned to the spotlight. He left no grave, no statue, no foundation bearing his name, only actions, only atmosphere, only an echo, not of a man, but of a decision, to stop the cycle, to soften the code, to make room for 1,000 other architects, born not of shame, but of choice. The girl in the classroom finishes her sketch. She looks up, out the window. The sky is not empty. Drones glide, signals pulse, satellites blink. But she does not see technology. She sees invitation. She folds the paper, puts it in her pocket, and smiles. Not because she knows what she will become, but because no one will stop her from becoming it. Across the world, this is repeated. Small things, gentle things, unmeasured by metrics, unafraid of ridicule. The quiet revolution does not march, it grows, like ivy across broken towers, like roots beneath abandoned factories, like light finding cracks in a ceiling built too long to block it. It does not ask for recognition. It does not ask for control. It only asks this: do not kill the dream before it can breathe. And in that asking, it changes everything. At the end of all this, all the machines, all the memory, all the years of building systems not to rule but to release, we are left not with spectacle, but with one truth, delivered not in voice but in atmosphere. Truth he once whispered into code long after the stars had stopped answering. Some empires burn, others become constellations.